Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another vlog on this rather cold end of British summertime. Clock's gone back an hour afternoon. I thought, well, hey, let's try and warm things up with a nice juicy vlog, a bit of an epic. But I'm going to split it up into three sections, dealing with, well, basically some random on all things good and not so good about film, manual focus, SLR cameras. Predominantly 1977 to 1983. And if you're thinking of getting into photography for the first time, where on earth do you start? So many makes, so many cameras, just some random on and some thoughts. Not just my thoughts, but I've done a little bit of research and I thought it'd be interesting to head over to some, just to get the two pennies worth from camera technicians. So I've watched some vlogs to see what they say. People predominantly who are under the skin of these cameras. And I thought coupled with user information, the combination of, the mechanic and the driver, if you like, those two perspectives, where to go, what to possibly avoid, ticking time bombs, that kind of thing. And I should say, there are one or two in there that it sort of grieves me to say don't go near, because I've used them and owned them in the past. Not for a long time, but hey, but look, take it on chin. But let's give this a little bit of context. 1977 to 1983, a wonderful time for cameras. Back then, Jim Callahan was in office. Didn't stick around long. He's, there were strikes galore. I think he's famed for a couple of sayings, crisis, what crisis, that kind of thing. Anyway, that heralded Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, enough said. Let's not go there. Music-wise, wow. I mean, just spoilt for choice. Some of my favourites, I had to actually make a list of them because, I just couldn't remember them all off the top of my head anyway. Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Cure, The Police, B-52s, David Bowie, Roxy Music, Joe Jackson, Queen, Blondie, The Pretenders, Chrissie Hynde. Wow. And, I mean, just a host of, that's just a few. I could go on. Fleetwood Mac, Supertramp, The Smiths, Squeeze, The Stone Roses, The Stranglers, Neil Young, Nina Simone, Sinatra, ELO, Lou Reed, The Velvet Underground, Iggy Pop, Grace Jones, The Clash, Talking Heads, Joy Division. I mean, yeah. There was an awful lot of turmoil politically going on, but hey, when you've got that kind of music and culture going on, it's absolutely a magical time. One other band, Japan, headed by David Sylvian. And that's probably the link, isn't it? Japan, that's where most of these SLR cameras were made, not all of them. And I thought, let's go to a few cameras, like I said, that these technicians have said, not great cameras. And the first one is a camera that's actually touted as a really good beginner's camera to start off with. Now, this might be a little bit contentious, but, they're under the skin of these cameras. They know. I'm not trying to upset anybody, far from it. But I keep seeing the Minolta X700. Now, a disclaimer, I've never used that camera, ever. It just, for some reason, went under the radar. I'd sort of heard of it. Now, back in the day, fantastic camera. However, today, 40 years later, not so good. That doesn't mean that there aren't people that have them and they work perfectly well, and they enjoy them and what have you. But we're talking about the second-hand market here, and what may have been good back then ain't necessarily great now. And that's really an important factor to consider. You know, it was a good camera back in the day, and you know, if it's still working, then it's great. But if you buy a camera and it's not working, or it breaks down soon, that's just an expensive loss of money down the drain kind of thing. There are other contenders that have a far better legacy and are renowned for being very rugged, very bulletproof, that also the camera technicians of today who fix cameras day in, day out also love. They see the quality of the materials used, the design from the ground up in terms of how easy they are to repair. And if they're easy to repair, they're quick to repair, they're cheaper to get repaired. And other cameras that were probably looking over their shoulder, playing catch up and throwing something together that there aren't that many parts for, and they've got to take the whole camera apart to get to any component because because they were rushed through. So all good things, all good points to kind of consider. One other camera that grieves me, to say to avoid is the Canon A1. Use that camera, fantastic optics, and they were, look, Canon didn't have a recall on these cameras. At no point did they have a recall. There was nothing wrong with them back then. Today, ticking time bomb. Avoid them. The Canon A1, and I think we can also say the Canon AE1 and the Canon AE1 program, I believe. And there are lots of great things about them, and people love them. But 40 years down the line, they are going wrong badly. And I mean, I did make a few notes. I don't want to do this too much because it's just boring apart from anything else. But the Canon AE1, I'm not a technical person, so I just thought I'd scribble a few things down. I've actually put camera AE1, A1, AE1 program, no, ticking time bomb, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. The mirror boxes have problems with. There are not many parts about for these. The electromagnetic thing goes wrong. I don't know what an electromagnetic thing does in a camera, but there are problems with those. The battery door, which because it's on the outside, everybody knows about those. Apparently they're brittle and they break and God knows what else. And they use plastic gears in the internals. Plastic gears. Didn't know that. The prism, you have to take everything apart, apparently, to get to it. It's an expensive service. Now, that's a legendary camera. Yes, legendary back in the day. Not so great 40 years later. And that's the key thing. That's really the that's really kind of top of the list of criterion that should be considered, I think, before you consider a 4,000th of a shutter speed or 1,000th of a shutter speed or any of that. Are they good today? And underline, 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 exclamation mark. The Olympus OM1, legendary camera. Lots of fantastic things about it. Beautiful lenses. But I'm not going. I've seen them recommended. Not so much, in my opinion, from what I found out. Again, never used one, but apparently, the batteries that they used for this camera are no longer available today. So you have to get the compartment completely swapped over, which you can do. But do you want to be doing that? I don't know. There was another thing, the prism on it. There was a material that they used in and around the prism that melts, and again, it can be cleaned off. But 40 years down the line, that's what's happening to these fantastic cameras today. Not do you want to deal with that? But it's up to you. Also, look, it was touted as a big thing back then. It was marketed on the fact that it was so small. I think the smallest SLR possibly ever made. I've held one, and for me it's too small. Now, I don't like big cameras, big bulky heavy cameras, and so I was really excited to pick one up and feel. And I just thought, my finger on the shutter is actually almost, it's almost at a vertical, it's tiny. So unless you've got really small hands, probably not such a great, such a great contender. Again, it's a legendary camera, so I'm going to upset some people, but I'm going by what camera technicians say today about them. I can't avoid. Pentax, fantastic. Again, I've owned one. The Super A, more of a kind of electronic camera. Quite a lot of it is electronic. But, just a lovely camera. But, again, they're not so great today. There are, I've said, Pentax and Canon and what have you. There are older versions, more mechanical versions, let's say very late 60s, early 70s, that are very good. The Spotmatic, the Pentax Spotmatic with a Takumar lens, Pentax Shade, Pentax, optics are legendary, absolutely brilliant. But I'm not going to talk about them so much because, they are there, and they are potentially really good cameras to think about if you're getting into it for the first time. But they're a lot heavier, larger, heavier, more brick-like cameras. Do you want to? I'm just thinking, maybe not. But Canon did some really good ones as well. Let me see. So there was the Pentax MX as well. The K1000, which. Bit basic. They had those at college all the time, and I never really liked that camera all that much. But some people do. And the Canon. So there was the FT, the FTB, and the FL. Again, more sort of, or an EF. They're all sort of more brick-like, heavier, older cameras. The Minolta SRT 201, again, heavier, more brick-like. And there were other more niche manufacturers like the Contax or Yashica. But again, I'm going to say, they may have made some fantastic cameras, but not so not so many made, and therefore probably fewer parts, more difficult to service, more expensive to service. So I'm kind of going. Look, I'm playing safe here a little bit, and I can't talk about every single camera. That would just be, that would be absurd. So what I wanted to do, and I think, there are probably 6 or 7 cameras that I'm going to mention here, but I'm going to whittle it down really damn quick. Nikon. That's the make that back in 77 to 83, Nikon, I wouldn't say had the monopoly, but they were the company that were making legendary cameras, really high-end. Nikon and Canon have always, gone shoulder to shoulder and tried, one decade it's Nikon, one decade it's Canon. They have an edge on, but back then I think it's reasonable, kind of fair to say that Nikon were making fantastic cameras, both in they had sort of 3 sections. There was the beginner camera, there was the advanced amateur or semi-professional market, and there was the pro market. And in all 3, they were really the main contenders. And that's where we're going to concentrate today. The Nikon F cameras. I'm going to kick off with a couple of beginners cameras. I'm not going to talk too much about them because price-wise today, they are nearly as much as, well, they're very similar in price to an FE, a Nikon FE. And you get an awful lot more camera with an FE. It's, an FE is the real deal. The beginners models were the EM and the FG. Small, not much smaller, but a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, more plasticky, didn't do as much, didn't have as much on. And, I'm not knocking them, great little cameras. But they're kind of more point and shoot. And that's kind of why I think they were beginners cameras, something to get you off the ground running with, and fine. But when I'm trying to remember what I was like back then. I wanted to experiment. I bought my first camera. I knew, I wanted to shoot street, definitely because of an image I saw. That's why I bought the camera in the first place. But I then very quickly kind of found myself wanting to shoot some landscapes, wanting to shoot portrait, wanting to try some long exposure, some bulb settings on a tripod, all this kind of stuff. And some studio work, some flash, expensive flash gear. And these cameras allow you to do all of that. And that's why I'm going to concentrate on that middle section, the semi-professional section. I've done a vlog on the F3, which was their pro camera back then. Go to my channel if you want, have a look at that one. There are other vlogs as well on the F3. Again, legendary camera. That was the pro camera back then. But for starting off, even though the F3 is fantastic, it's a little bit more pricey. Not an awful lot more pricey than some of the others. In fact, it's probably a similar price, but a little bit heavier. You can still use it as a point and shoot, and I would still recommend it as a starter camera, believe it or not. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about this middle section, and that's, I'll say right now, I have the FE, but if that died on me tomorrow, and somebody said, right, you've got to close your eyes, put your hand in a hat, pull out any one of these 4 cameras I'm about to talk about, I am going to be over the moon, happy as a sandboy with any one of those 4 cameras. Fantastic cameras that you can do lots with, and that are very good value for money. 2 more than the other 2, but still, you know, pretty damn good value for money, considering what they do and the quality and the robustness, and just great starter cameras. You know, just because Nikon have a beginner market doesn't mean that they're necessarily good for learning with. If you want to sort of learn, they're great. If you don't want to learn, great. You know, put a good lens on it, off you go. Great little cameras. I'm not going to knock them at all. But if you want to experiment a little bit, guess what? These are really the. So let's pinpoint those 4. Let's pinpoint those 4. It's the FE, the FE2, the later model, the FM, and the FM2. The FM2 being the later model to the FM. Also, the FE, FE2 is electronic shutter. The E refers to the electronic shutter, and the M on the FM and FM2 are mechanical shutters. That's the main difference. You can almost put a line, FE, FE2, line, FM, FM2. And look, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I'm gonna, before I do that, before I get onto these main 4, which again can be whittled down very, very quickly, depending on your needs, depending on what you want out of a camera, which we'll talk about. I want to talk about 2 other cameras just quickly, the FA and the FM3A. Now, the FA just has to be included because it is an astonishing camera. It's a very electronic camera. It's one of the later cameras that Nikon made. I think from 83 to 87. There was a problem with this camera. All the Japanese queued up for them, and Nikon could not meet the supply and demand thing. They couldn't meet the demand. They couldn't supply the cameras for the demand. And so, very unlike Nikon, they rushed them through a little bit. And so, there were some problems with this camera. I would suggest that those have all been weeded out by now, long ago. You can head over to eBay and get one of these for £150. They are cheap, you know, and less, and a little bit more probably, depending on condition and that kind of thing. But I can't sort of put it on the main list because of those problems. However, it's a fantastic buy. I mean, I think it introduced matrix metering for the first time. The metering on these cameras is phenomenal. Now, you know, apart from the electronics and the initial problems, it's not going to go onto the list because even though it's a brilliant price, it's not going to go on because, you know, I've seen some vlogs on these cameras and I've seen that they, you know, they do have some issues, let's say. I don't know how extensive they are, and I don't know how difficult they are to fix, but, you know, you could buy one and it'd be brilliant, and they're newer than the 4 I'm going to talk about. It's more recent because it's you know, it's 83 to 87. I just didn't feel comfortable putting it on, even though it's probably a really, really good buy for a very good price. It is, you know, it is considered part of the F family, which is why I mention it. The other one that I'm going to talk about, that I'm going to mention, as I've said, is the FM3A. Now, this was built from 2001 to 2006. It was the last camera. Was it the last one? Well, together with the FA, it was the last one, the last manual focus SLR film camera that Nikon ever made. On paper, it is the best SLR camera ever made by anybody. Now, this camera went under the radar a little bit because digital was coming out back then. So although it was, it had a 5-year run, there weren't that many made of them. But it is an astonishing camera. It cherry picks every excellent thing about these 4 cameras I'm about to talk about and just packaged it into one. But again, it doesn't make the list for me. One, because it doesn't, not many people owned them. They are about, for sure. There are enough made. It's not like a niche camera, but it doesn't have that legendary workhorse thing. They weren't the cameras that were being used back in 77 to 83 before DSLRs came out, if you see what I mean. So they don't have, even though they probably are the very best of the 4 cameras I'm going to talk about, for me, they don't have that legacy that these 4 cameras I am going to talk about. Even though it's a newer camera, it is probably, theoretically, the best camera ever made, I would suggest. It is a mechanical shutter, mechanical camera, but it has aperture priority. It's a phenomenal beast. But the second reason I'm not mentioning is that it's expensive. It is considerably more expensive than the other 4 that I'm about to talk about. But it deserves a mention. It absolutely deserves a mention. I think that if money were no object, I would probably just say buy an FM3A. But it doesn't even make the list, just because of the price and because it doesn't have the legacy thing, even though it probably is incredible if you've got very deep pockets. Even what, 2000, so it could be 20 years old, it could be sort of 15 years old. For a 35mm film camera, I think that's a lot of money. I think they're overpriced. Not for how good they are, they're just overpriced. They're, it's the market. Just because something's expensive doesn't mean it's, it's overpriced, I think. It should be more expensive than the 4 I'm going to talk about. It's too much, I think. Anyway, so that politely, along with the FE, gets just put to one side, I'm afraid. It's difficult to say that, but look, all things considered, these 4 cameras I'm going to talk about, I think, will absolutely blow you away. Sort all your needs out, do everything that you need them to do, and they're all pretty damn similar. I mean, to bore you with a few facts just to get them out of the way, the FM was the first one made in 1977, followed by the FE, 78. These are the 2 establishing models, if you like. And then later on, 4 years later, 1982, the Nikon FM2, so the later version to the FM, and the FE2, later version to the FE. That was 1983. All sharing the same kind of chassis, all pretty much the same size and weight. There's a few grams difference. The FE and the FM are both 590 grams, and the FM2 and the FE2. The FM2 is 540 grams without a lens, and the FE2 is 550. So not much of a thing to think about there. The way in which you would perhaps decide, what divided the line, to me there shouldn't be a line. I don't care whether it's got mechanical shutter or an electronic shutter. But there is historically a little bit of a thing about mechanical shutters and electronic shutters, and there are pros and cons, and I think a lot of it's a bit silly and probably steeped in a bit of snobbery somewhere along the line. Yeah, I've said it. I'm sorry, but I think there is. Look, back in the day when the FM came along in 1977, then a year later an electronic shutter. This was a massive thing back then. Believe it or not, it was a revolutionary thing. Nobody had ever heard. It's a brand new thing to photography. An electronic shutter. Shock, horror, gasp, sharp intake of breath. The world didn't know what to do with itself. It was, and you got these professionals saying, "Oh, well, what if I get stuck in the field and I don't have batteries?" Funny thing for a professional to be saying. It's kind of what if you forget film? A professional's supposed to remember these things. I mean, look, DSLRs, professional photographers, change their batteries 2 or 3 times a day, probably every day. The little LR44 batteries that fit in here last a couple of years. So is it a big deal? You're putting batteries in there for your meter readings anyway. So, but there's this whole argument of, oh, well, I don't need batteries to shoot the camera. No, you don't. Big deal. And so what? If you've got batteries with an electronic shutter, not a problem. It's not like an electronic or like a quartz watch and a mechanical watch, for example. A month goes by, your mechanical watch loses or gains, a couple of minutes over a month, a couple of seconds a day, whatever. And the quartz one is probably only lost a couple of seconds. Yeah, that's just a little bit of time. It's no big deal. But look, mechanical shutters are not as accurate as electronic shutters. And they need more TLC. They need to go in and be adjusted more than electronic shutters. Electronic shutters are just very, very accurate. Ask any technician, I'm sorry, but it's true. Mechanical shutters will lose their timing. And if you lose your timing, then, that affects your exposure. And that can affect whether you've got a photograph or not. So just from a reliability thing, or an accuracy of exposure, then I would say electronic shutters win every single time. But there's this other argument that, oh, I know more about photography if I have a manual camera, and because mechanical shutters are normally manual, apart from the FM3A, which is what made it astonishing. One of the things that made it astonishing. And so they kind of, the purists said, oh, well, I don't need an aperture priority, which electronic shutter cameras have on the F cameras. I don't need that. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. He pays you money, he takes your choice. I would rather have an aperture priority on my camera. It's an extra thing, isn't it? If I want to shoot quickly, it's there. You can use it. It's very useful sometimes. And that's where the snobbery factor comes in. Anyway, I don't even want to, that's enough said on that, because it's not, I want to deal with real terms in real, in using these cameras, how they affect what you do and why you might lean to one rather than the other. So electronic shutters, FE and FE2, both have aperture priority, or auto, as it's referred to. It's not auto, it's aperture priority. Which, if you're not familiar with, basically means you throw your film in, you set your ISO, which you have to do with all cameras, SLRs, set your ISO, and then put your camera into aperture priority. And then basically, you are just, apart from focusing, which you have to do, obviously, you focus, because it's not a it's a manual focus lens, prime lens. You use your aperture to turn to get an appropriate. You use your aperture, and the camera chooses the most appropriate shutter speed. So what am I on? I'm pointing at this light in the camera, f8, and the camera is telling me at f8 2/50 a second. I'm at 1600 because I push my film the vast majority of the time, and that's kind of, that's how it goes. If you're shooting manually, then you press your button here, take it out of auto, and then you just do it manually yourself. Takes a bit longer, but you can do it yourself, and that's what the FM and the FM2 have. Just manual settings. That's great. I can work with either. But for me, when I was choosing one of these four, I chose the FE because I like the luxury of having an aperture priority. If that offends you, if you're a purist, I only shoot with a manual camera, fine, whatever. Look, my go-to camera is all mechanical. I didn't choose it because it's all mechanical. I chose it because I love what it does. It's a rangefinder, and that suits me the vast majority of the time. If I could have it with aperture priority, I would. Simple as. Sorry, but I'm not one of these people that says, "Oh, I only shoot with a manual camera or manually," or I only shoot with an SLR, or I only shoot with a. No, sorry. I just think that's a very binary kind of way of thinking. My rangefinder is what I go for. If I'm going to shoot reportage, I'm deliberately going out to shoot. That's what I choose every single time. Once in a blue moon, I will just do exactly the same thing. Go out with the intention of shooting street photography, reportage, and I'll take the f3 with me. If I'm going out and I'm not, I'm going shopping or I'm going anywhere else, I'm not intentionally going out to shoot something, but I don't want to leave the house without a camera, guess what comes out with me? The FE, every single time. It's lighter than the f3, it's, I can bang it about a bit, it's no big deal, it's just there, and I have a 35mm capacity camera slung diagonally over my shoulder, out the way. If I see something, all of a sudden, up it comes, boom. And it's just a beautiful camera for that. It's a beautiful camera for all sorts of things. And as I said earlier, this is the first part of a 3-part series on buying your first SLR. This part, I'm going to deal with buying a camera or throwing information out there that will help you maybe possibly to decide which way you want to go. Not necessarily my way. That's for you to decide. Take it or leave it. It's I'm not trying to sell you anything. You may disagree with everything I've said, and it'll help you decide, no, I want to actually do this, and that's cool. It's just information. That's all this is about. The second part is, if you're buying a second-hand camera, SLR camera, that might be 44 years old, 45 years old, the light seals. I'm going to take you through how to decide whether look, I did all my due checks with this camera, all my due diligence, and I made sure that it didn't have fungus on the optics, on the mirror, and all that kind of stuff on the inside of the camera. Made sure that all the shutter speeds worked. It's an electronic camera, so they probably are going to be fine, but check. Ticked all the boxes and fell flat on my face. Completely and utterly forgot to ask about the light seals. Now, I'll be honest, look, I've never had a light seal go on me, ever. The f3, I looked at the light seals on that, for the first time, you know, I wasn't, it wasn't even in my mind, because I've never, you know, the rangefinder which I shoot with, so I started with SLR for, you know, that's what I shot for the first 20 years. Second half, next 20 years, because I've been shooting for 40 years, was with a rangefinder. And I've never had, you know, that those seals are still great. You know, this has never been CLA'd or anything. But I started to see vlogs, oh, light seals. And had I asked on the FE, had I asked about these seals, they were being honest, they would have said, yeah, they're fried. And I probably wouldn't have bought the camera. I probably just would have put me off. I'd have moved on, gone, you know, somewhere else or whatever. It arrived and they were shot to pieces. They just disintegrated. And that is one of the things you're going to have to be mindful of. But, you know, I did a lot of research on how to change the seals and realised it's not a big deal. I've never done it before. It took me an hour and a half. So it's not, you know, but again, that's going to be part 2. I'm going to talk about it now. But it is one of the main things that might occur, that might rear its ugly head, if you like. You know, I am so pleased I didn't turn this down with hindsight, because it's in great condition, it works beautifully, and for an hour and a half, changing the light seals, not terribly difficult to do. At least for me it wasn't. You know, you might decide it is too difficult for you. But I'm back up to speed. I have a light, tight camera now, for very little cost, hardly anything at all, and they're great for the next, you know, probably for the duration of the life of this camera. But it, as I say, it is one of those things. Don't forget to ask, but maybe it's not such a deal breaker. That's going to be part 2. Part 3 is going to be talking about what you can do with these cameras, what they're great for, the amazing stuff that you can shoot with them. I mean, really, really amazing stuff. I'm going to also talk about lenses. This particular lens, I've got f3 FE, 2 very similar lenses. They're both called the same. They're both 1.8 AIS pancake lenses, but they're different. There's 3 of them in this family. They all look very, very similar. You can tell if you look very, very carefully, but the actual body, no, you can't. Look very, very, very similar, but there's a huge difference. And it's I just think it's a, you know, once you've got your camera, you need great optics, and I think this is, you know, you can do an awful lot worse than go down this route. Makes for a very lovely, compact, in your hand system that you can just go out with, no flash, no anything, just the camera, just the optics, and have an awful lot of fun. An awful lot of fun. Let me just take this strap off because it's just getting in the way. I meant to do that earlier, sorry. Yeah, you can just, you know, optics are vital, okay? You can buy whatever camera you want, but if you've got poor optics on them, it doesn't matter how good the camera is. You know, if I only have one of these lenses, and you know, this is the pro camera, the f3. If I have one of these lenses and I take a photograph of this camera, then take the lens off and put it on this camera, they will take exactly the same photograph, exactly the same, you know, exactly the same exposure, exactly the same processing. The only thing that decides how good your quality of photograph is, besides obviously, you know, what you've shot and how you've shot it and that kind of thing. The only thing that decides how good the quality of the image is the optics, not the camera. The optics, the coating on the optics, the quality of the optics, and how you process the film once you've done it. So optics, very, very important. And that's what I'm going to be discussing on the third part. The optics and the amazing, just how versatile these cameras are, the kind of quality of images that you can get. Just a very simple setup. Little 50mm lens, great camera, and you can do an awful lot with them. And it's it's a vlog in itself. So watch out for that. That's part 3. Part 2, light seals. Part 1. Let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about here. So the main things to discuss between the FE, FE2, FM, FM2 are the mechanical shutter and the electronic shutter. But in real terms, I would suggest that it doesn't make an awful lot of difference, apart from the fact that you have aperture priority with the FE models, FE, FE2, and you get a different viewfinder. Not viewfinder, but layout or meter reading in these two cameras. When I say two, I mean the FE and the FE2 and the FM and the FM2. Now, in the FE and the FE2, you get a, let's just call it a green needle. And I think the vast majority of people prefer this. They like it, regardless of whether you like a mechanical shutter or not. Just in terms of meter reading, the FE and the FE2 have a beautiful meter reading. It is a needle. I'm going to bring it up here, give you an example to show you what it looks like. And basically at 1 and 2 o'clock, you know you are good to go. You're fast enough, your shutter speed is fast enough, you're fine. You're good to take a photograph. 3 o'clock, yeah, you're a 15th or a 30th of a second. I mean, that's with the FE. It's going to be, I would imagine, slightly different with the FE2 because you've got you go up to 4,000th of a second, so it'll vary slightly. But you get what I mean. What I'm saying is that when you're taking the photograph, when you're looking through the viewfinder, you hardly have to actually look at the number, the shutter speed. So long as that needle is up there, you know you're good to go. Be a little bit mindful when it's at 3 o'clock, and obviously very mindful when it's down, at 4 and 5 o'clock. It's a beautiful just way of metering or just seeing that you're good to go without actually having to read little LCDs which you get on the FM and the FM2. It's a little LCD diode thing, plus and minus. It is just, you see, you've got your shutter speed on the left hand side, and then you've got your I can't remember what's on the left and what's on the right, but you've got two sides of the shutter to look at. What is it? I'm trying to remember. Yeah, your shutter speed on the left hand side, and then your sort of plus and minus diode thing on the right hand side. For me, that's just a little bit distracting in terms of, it takes my eye away from what's going on in the viewfinder, from the photograph I want to take, from the photograph I'm about to take. It means I'm not. It's just more of a distraction. It's not impossible. It's not a deal breaker. I can work with it. My rangefinder is a little bit like that as well. It's not a big deal. But with the FE and the FE2, you've just got that left-hand side to think about. And guess what? It's just lovely peripheral, a sense of where that needle is. That's all you have to, you don't have to read the number. Just keep the just have the green thing up there. And if you're in a manual setting, then you're just lining up the black line with the green line. Really, really lovely way to go. And that's in real terms, that's the difference between the FM versions and the FE versions. I don't think, I could work with any of them, but I prefer the FE versions just for ease of use. But it's not, for me, as I say, it's not going to be a deal breaker, because any one of these are fantastic cameras, in my opinion. Absolutely phenomenal cameras. What else? All four work with the MD12 motor drive. There is a difference in screens. So the FM and the FE both have the K screen, which are fine, but the FM2 and the FE2 both have a K2 screen, which is a little bit brighter. A little bit. It's not massively or anything like that, but a little bit brighter. The Nikon FM3A, the one that I mentioned earlier, the expensive one, it has a K3 screen, which is even brighter still. They all have interchangeable screens, apart from the FM. That has a fixed screen. They all have double exposure. Now, one thing that's really probably, well, actually, again, it's not that big a deal, but the FE and the FM, the earlier models, can be used with almost any lens in the Nikon range. Phenomenal amount of lenses that can be used with these, pre-AI and later. Okay, with the later models, the FE2 and the FM2, it's AI and later lenses. Obviously, you can't use the G lenses and ones like that, but all the others. So it's AI and later, whereas with the earlier models, you can use pre-AI and later lenses. So, there was a big thing, when the FE2s and the FM2s came out, people wanted to be able to use the older lenses, and they couldn't. So it was, it was a consideration. Let's say that. You've still got loads and loads of lenses to choose from. So in real terms, again, it's not that big a deal, really. Now, the other things, we've sort of put a line down that way. You can almost put a line down this way now between those models. So the later versions, the FE2 and the FM2, have 4,000th of a second shutter speed. Looks great on paper, really great on paper, but in real terms, are you going to use that? Are you going to need 4,000th? I don't ever think I've used 4,000th of a second ever in my life. Unless you're, shooting into the sun or shooting wide open in Africa in the middle of the day. Even then, I don't think you're going to need 4,000th of a second. It looks great, and look, it's always nice to have more than you need, I guess. But it's not going to make me want to spend an awful lot more money on a camera. It just isn't. The other thing that may be a thing for you is the flash sync. On the FM and the FE, it's 1/25th of a second flash sync, which is pretty damn good in my opinion. On the FE2, it's 2/50th of a second. They use the honeycomb titanium shutter for quite a while. I think it got replaced with later models with an aluminium shutter. On the FM2, it's a little. When the first one came out, 1982, it was 200th of a second, and then 2 years later there was the FM2N, which I don't think it says N on the camera, but you can differentiate it by virtue of the fact that it's got 2/50th of a second flash sync. That's got 125, whereas it would be 2/50th on the later model, so after 1984, 2/5 of a second. Is that a big thing? A lot of people use flash. I don't. I have shot flash in the early days when I was experimenting. Don't use flash now. In fact, I would, if I were to ever use flash again, I kind of like slower shutter speeds, because I like to freeze the action and have the background a little bit, some movement in there. I just like that aesthetic. So it's not a big, I never ever use flash, so it's not a concern for me whatsoever. But you might, hey. And the other thing to say is the FM is 1 second to 1,000th of a second, whereas the FE is 8 seconds to 1,000th of a second. On the FM2, it's 1 second to 4,000th of a second. On the FE2, it's 8 seconds again to 4,000th of a second. And that's pretty much it. I mean, if you want to tour around the camera, your wind on crank, you've got your shutter release, you've got your double exposure, so you just push that in and it stops the frame, it stops the film advancing. It's just a little gear lever there, I suppose. You have a depth of field button there. I don't know if you're seeing that. And you have a self timer down here. Self timer that, do you want to see that? I don't know. Off it goes. And then it doubles up. It's a sort of one lever that does 2 functions. If you move it the other way, it's an exposure lock, which is really nice to have. Which, again, you don't have on those earlier models. The EM and the FG. But this has an exposure lock. Your needle doesn't fix. It still moves. It gives you the impression that it hasn't locked, but it has. It's just allowing you to see what the differential would be, but it does lock it, so that's really useful to have. If you're shooting, if you want to get an exposure meter for a shadow area, and then keep that exposure meter while you pan to shoot a brighter area or whatever, or vice versa. You have your lens off, which is pretty much the same on, well, I don't know whether it's the same, but just press that in, turn your lens to take the lens off. You have your external flash sync for studio flash, that kind of thing. Little port there, unscrew the button there, and it just gives you. You have your hot shoe. You have, on this is the only model that has this, which is, I really like. So going on about, people being scared that they're not going to be able to take a photograph because their batteries are dead. We actually have a battery. You have a battery check there. It does get stuck on some, and you have to push it back up. This one's still good. Just press that down. It shows you how strong your batteries are, and you have about a 2-week thing where it starts to blink a little bit and look a bit faded. So it doesn't just, the batteries don't just die on you. That reader gives you information for about 2 weeks to let you know that you need to change your batteries. What else? You obviously have your dial here. Say aperture priority, which is on green. Which, if it's in aperture priority, it'll just click in there, and then it locks. And the only way you get it out is to press that button there. And out it comes. And again, once it goes in, it locks. So it's just a way of locking something down and things not moving accidentally. hot shoe, so it's not TTL. I think on the FE2 it is TTL, which again I guess is a thing to consider. May help you decide. What else? You have your exposure compensation lock, which is just, you have to kind of lift up the dial, and if you can see that, I can't see what you're seeing, and you have half stop increments. You just lift up this dial. It's very firm, you can't knock it by accident. Always have it on 0 if you're not using it, obviously. But yeah, just locks in, locks down, and then you have your ISO settings here, which you just press that down and twizzle. It goes up to 3200. Yeah, 3200. ISO or ASA. ISO, International Standards Organization, which is the new, currency, if you like. ASA, American Standards Association, I think. They just wanted to get rid of the American thing and make it more of an international name. It's exactly the same thing. ISO is called today. And that's just really simple. As I say, press that down and twizzle it to whatever you shoot at, whatever your film tells you to shoot at, or whatever you want to. My default setting is 400 HP5. I shoot in England, so the weather's not brilliant all the time. It's not hugely sunny. I find 1600 is great, so I push the film and then compensate it in the processing. And that's pretty much it, I think. You've got a 1/4 inch screw thread there for a tripod, smack bang center to the lens, and you have your coupling things for your motor wind, if you want to use one of those, and your battery compartment, and your rewind little lever there when you've finished your film. Just press that in and lift up your rewind crank, push that in, lift this up, and then start turning. And once you've pushed it in, you don't have to keep it in, and you just turn in the direction of the arrow. All really, really simple. You've got instruction manuals for this camera that you can still download as PDFs. It will take you all the way through it. And that's, that I think is pretty much it. If I've missed anything out, I apologize. Ask me in the box below. The FE doesn't have the FE2 at the front. It has the FE alongside the serial number. Ba-boom, like so. Just it makes it, I don't know, I quite like it. It makes it more discreet. It makes it less shouty, which is always good if you're shooting street. And that's pretty much it. All 4 cameras, they have little differences, little nuances, like any other camera. None of the FM2 or FE2 have anything on it that I would deem important to me, but there may be things that, like flash and TTL, that are important to you. Price wise, and this is of November 2021, prices are going up, I have to say. So look, the FE is the cheapest of all 4, without a doubt. Not the cheapest as in because it's badly made. They all have the same construction, same rugged reliability and quality. I'm going to sort of, it's going to depend on condition. It's going to depend on whether it's got a box and where you buy it from and all that sort of thing with all these cameras. But round about the sort of £70 mark, you could pay more, you could pay less. The FM, you can put another 50 quid on. Just not because it's a better camera, but because it's got a mechanical shutter. It just has that premium on it because it's a mechanical shutter. Mechanical shutter? Is that... Yeah, that doesn't make it a better camera in my opinion. You know, the argument has always been if you drop an electronic camera, or not electronic camera, but a camera with a, you know, this camera or an FE2 in a bucket of water, and you turn it on, the circuit will die. End of camera. Hey, look, if you drop a bucket of an FM or an FM2 or any camera in a bucket of water, it ain't going to do it much good. So, look, hey, enough on that. But yeah, for me, you get far more on an FE than you do an FM, but you're going to pay more for an FM just because it's a mechanical shutter that isn't as reliable, or not as accurate, rather, I should say. But so yeah, £70 the FM, probably I would say round about 120, 140, 150, that kind of price. The FE2, so the sort of later version to this, I'm going to say round about, as of today, round about, for a decent one, you know, between 130 and 180, 190, 200 pounds, something like that. You know, depending on where you get it from. You know, I've seen people put cameras up and they say they're mint, and they're not. They're far from mint. So you've got to be a little bit careful. Just have a look round, and if you're buying off eBay, a lot of them are from Japan, so you have to factor in taxes and postage. Occasionally you get free postage, but generally it's about 20 quid for them to ship it out to you. So you've got to factor little things like that in. You know, if you don't get it from Japan, then, you know, great. But the majority, I think, probably, you know, have a hunt round, have a look round. But that sort of price. And then for an FM2, the most expensive of all four cameras I've spoken about, you know, I would say £250 to £300, something like that, give or take, you know. So big difference between an FE and an FM2 or an FE2. Massive difference. For me, that's an incredible camera for an incredible price. Get an awful lot of camera. Everything that you get on, really, the FE2 and the FM2. Apart from that, you know, 2/50th of a second shutter speed as opposed to 125, and 4,000th of a second as opposed to 1,000. 1,000 is perfectly good in the vast majority of cases, the vast majority of the time. So, you know, I don't think, you know, I just think the FE is a great way to go. Yeah, it's not like, oh, it's the cheapest, therefore it's the best. No, just in real terms of what all four cameras do, that just makes an awful lot more sense. And I will say, right here and now, all the camera technicians, all the vlogs that I saw, them talking about cameras that they would recommend, SLR 35mm, manual focus cameras, or with manual focus lenses, these four come out top. Every single time. They love these cameras. They think these are the best made, best quality materials, best design, ease of fixing them, just from the bottom up, fantastically designed, and they are superb workhorses. They've got that history to them, unlike the FM3A, which is a sort of newer camera which wasn't put through its paces so much. I mean, they were a little bit, don't get me wrong, of course they were a little bit, but not to the same degree as these cameras. These have far more, you know, these have been subjected to an awful lot more, which might sound bad, but if they're still going, they're still going. That's just testament to how good they are, really. You know, they're still good today. And that, I think, is it. That's probably all I want to say on them on the subject. Like I say, light seals next, part 2. How to change them, how to replace them, and then a great lens to go on your camera, and what you can do with a simple setup. Just that. No gimmicks, no thumbs up, no soft release, nothing. Just a completely pared down, simple camera like this. What the kind of images you can take with them, the quality of images you can take with them. But you can achieve blistering things with this little outfit, which, you know, if you buy right, you can get for a really good price, a phenomenal price. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else. I think I've sort of gone through pretty much everything. Yeah. As I say, if there are any questions, if I've left anything out, I've definitely left things out, but if there are any things that I haven't covered, feel free to ask me. If I can answer them, I will do, with pleasure. This is not, in a very real sense, although I'm talking about cameras, in a very real sense, I find talking about cameras utterly boring. And the real object of doing this vlog is not to talk about cameras, it's to help you get an idea of what might be a good camera to buy to get you out shooting. That's the objective, to get you out shooting film, to get you out shooting with an SLR, and to dip your toe in the water of that world, because it's, for me, it's just the most amazing thing that you can do. It's just an incredibly liberating thing, an incredibly rewarding thing. It's frustrating sometimes. It's annoying sometimes. You know, it kind of mimics life. It is life. You're photographing life. But we'll come to that in part 2 and part 3. But that's it for now. Thanks so much for stopping by. See you for the next one. Cheers for now.